Hello and welcome to the Leaders in Supply Chain podcast. I am your host, Radu Palamariu, Global Supply Chain Practice Head for Morgan Phillips Executive Search. I am delighted to have with us today Zvi Schreiber, CEO of Freightos. Freightos is the online freight marketplace to usher the logistics industry into the digital era, making global shipping faster, more cost-effective and smoother. Simply put, they are just like the Expedia or the Kayak for the shipping industry. With investors including GE Ventures and the Singapore Exchange, they raised approximately $94 million so far and currently have around 200 employees and 6 offices around the United States, Asia and the Middle East. Zvi Schreiber is our guest. Is the CEO of the company and is basically a serial internet entrepreneur. So he founded Tradium Inc., one of the pioneers of B2B e-commerce, which achieved revenues of over 100 million. Later on founded Unicorn Inc., which he sold to IBM, and Ghost sold to Infinity Fund. He was also the CEO of Clean Tech Electronics, a company called Like Tech, which he sold in 2011 to General Electric. He has a PhD in computer science, and he's also the author of Phys, Nothing is as It Seems, which tells the history of physics as a novel. Zvi, welcome and pleasure to have you with us today.
Great to be on.
Super. So actually, before we jump in, because I must admit that you have a fascinating background. So you've started a lot of companies. You've also written a book. Tell us a little bit about your story. I mean, I think you're among the very few people that have successfully exited so many businesses. You know, what kind of got you into the entrepreneurship bug, if I may ask?
Well, they weren't all successful, but thanks. Appreciate the introduction. I don't know, the best definition I've ever heard of an entrepreneur is someone who is unemployable. So basically, I just can't hold down a job, so I create companies.
Well, that's a good way of putting it. But does it also run kind of in the family, or what's sometimes there's a background story to it. I'm just probing a little bit to see if yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. My grandfather was a refugee and became a very successful entrepreneur. And my dad also has been an entrepreneur. So that's fair. It does indeed run in the family.
Yes.
But okay. I took a slightly different tack. I started my career. I didn't start as an entrepreneur. I started as an engineer and studied computer science and started for a couple of years as an engineer, but then pretty quickly looked to combine my interest in software and in entrepreneurship. So I've been very fortunate to be able to spend most of my career building software companies and doing both the things I love, software and also entrepreneurship.
Yes. And actually quite fascinating. And I wanted to ask you, how exactly did you start Freightos? Because obviously it is related to digital, it is related to the internet, but it is within an industry or freight industry, which is, maybe not your typical place to go. So how did you end up in that particular industry?
That's a good question. So up to 2011, I was only ever doing software. I've never had to deal with inventory and shipping. But in 2011, I took over a company that you mentioned earlier called Litech, making power supplies for LED lights. And so we were manufacturing them mostly in Shenzhen in South China and shipping every day, both ocean and air, from South China to the US and to Europe. And as a shipper, as a customer, I was quite shocked and confused that the shipping process was so manual. 2 or 3 days just to get a price quote. And then, there was no track and trace, and it never arrived when they said it would arrive. And when I eventually got the invoice, it rarely even matched the price quote that I'd waited so long to get anyway. So the whole thing was so, compared to passenger travel or compared to sending a FedEx box, the whole thing was so manual and old-fashioned. It kind of shocked me. And it was kind of confusing because I wasn't the first guy to ship something from China to America. This has been tried once or twice before. And
yes.
you'd have thought that by now the industry had figured out how to do it in a modern way. So after I had the good luck to sell that company, I decided to get back into software. And I just thought very simply, here's a problem that needs solving. The freight, the industry of international freight needs the same conveniences that we've had already for 20 years in passenger travel.
Super. Yeah. So it was a personal pain point that you experienced. Because I mean, at the end of the day, I think I was, and you have it also on the website in terms of the statistics. But pretty much, I think it's somewhere nearly 50% of all the importers, or 47% still kind of use spreadsheets, and even this happens even with large importers. So it's still an industry which is pretty much paper based, which is a kind of well, for 21st century is kind of backwards. Tell us a little bit, linking it to Freightos. So that was the problem. That was the challenge. That is still a challenge. How is Freightos addressing that, and how is Freightos making things easier?
So, I mean, the idea, like an Expedia or a Kayak or a Ctrip, a website where you can get instant price quotes and binding price quotes, and track and trace online, and just make shipping as easy as passenger travel. That was always the vision. In order to do that, though, we had to spend quite some years building infrastructure, because the problem is that none of the freight forwarders or the carriers actually had instant pricing or electronic pricing. If I can just once more maybe draw an analogy to passenger travel, Freightos didn't have the same luxury that Expedia and had when they launched Travelocity in the late 90s. In the passenger industry, there was always a standard for data. There were systems called Sabre and Amadeus. And those of us who are old enough remember in the 80s and the 90s, a good travel agent had a computer screen where they could see seats from all the airlines and prices from all the airlines. That technology, believe it or not, started in the 60s. So industry had a long tradition of having standardized data which was available electronically. And then Expedia and Travelocity took the same data and they marketed it online, but the data was there. In international shipping, the situation is very different. Certainly when we started 7 years ago, and even today, none of the freight forwarders and none of the carriers, and still today very few, even had a digital way of getting a price or checking availability. And now, thanks to Freightos and other efforts, there are now a few freight forwarders and carriers who can give prices digitally, who can tell you the availability of space on a flight or a ship digitally. So that's finally started to change. But that was a long way of explaining that we actually had to spend the first 4 or 5 years of Freightos for freight forwarders around the world, and to digitize their whole sales process, and sell software as a service to over 1,000 freight forwarders, etc. And that was the infrastructure. And only after we'd spent some years helping to digitize some of the service providers, only then were we able to launch the Freightos website, where we can show prices instantly, where you can compare prices, where you can book. So now we have the infrastructure for that. But it was a real fundamental change to the industry to just collect all the data and automate the pricing and make availability information about what capacity is available. It was quite a fundamental change to how the industry works.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me, and I mean, also knowing a little bit the industry where I remember this particular case in terms of the digitalization efforts, where I was at the conference and one of the panelists asked it was a shipping line, how's your digital transformation going? And then another one, which was a little bit naughty, said, yes, I don't know how they're going, but they don't have a website yet, so it's a bit of a problem. So indeed, the fact that you've had to do a lot of education doesn't surprise me. And I don't think it's uncommon, and it makes sense that after you've done that part, now you have a lot more data that you were able to build the platform on. And I think you were saying that if before it would take somebody about 3 days to get a quote, and it would be quite a manual process where you have to get a lot of calls and talk to a lot of people. Now through Freightos you can basically get that price points instantly, which is a huge time saver, right? Right. But a few hurdles to get over, right? So basically, I mean, I think that forwarders normally would have been a little bit nervous about a potential downward pressure on their rates, right? If you had this kind of online booking service as Freightos, because they can sometimes hedge the prices, right? So how did you overcome this hurdle? How did you make them basically, or how did you get them on board this journey of, seeing the benefits of it?
I mean, that's true, and it's actually gone a little easier than I thought. I mean, you're quite right that forwarders and carriers are a little nervous about pricing transparency and downward pressure on their price. On the other hand, people are aware what's going on in the world, and you can see the transparency that there is in passenger travel, in retail, in other industries. So I think people understand that the world is becoming more transparent throughout, and very few people would be silly enough to deny this move towards transparency. So the key, when I speak to a carrier or a freight forwarder about selling online or selling on Freightos specifically, I think the key is, a couple of things. One is to show that selling online reduces a lot of cost. So yes, you have the transparency, people can compare you with competitors, but we take away most of the cost of sale. I mean, the current cost of sale for freight services is horrible. The only way to sell freight up to now has been you hire a sales team and you buy them suits and you give them a budget to go and play golf with the shippers. The problem is there's 100,000 freight forwarders in the world, and they've all got salespeople in suits playing golf. So now you've got to play 2 rounds of golf or 3 rounds of golf. And,
Yes.
The cost of sale goes more and more with no guarantee of actually bringing in orders, because there's so much competition. So what we're able to show the freight forwarders is that when you sell online, yes, maybe there's a little more price pressure, but you actually reduce a lot of the cost and the risk of the sale. And then they see that on balance, actually, they're actually doing better because the cost of sale is lower. The other thing we're able to show is that, transparency is a great thing if you're the best, right? So if your prices are high and your service is bad and you don't honor your transit times, then transparency is not such a great thing. But if you have the best service and the best transit times and the best reputation and the best price, then transparency is a fantastic thing because everyone can see that you're the best and you get a lot of orders. So, for the good companies out there who are efficient and customer focused, this kind of comparison can be a wonderful thing, really.
Mm. Yes. And I think you also mentioned, and I think the industry in itself has seen quite a lot of movement in terms of this kind of online platform. So I think even Kuehne+Nagel tried to launch something around the lines of FreightNet. And you mentioned that all these other initiatives have helped the industry move on. Of course, Kuehne+Nagel might run a little bit into the issue of lacking objectivity or perceived, right? Because obviously they have a little bit of a skin in the game. Is this when other, let's say, on the shipping line, or I think there's been other examples when one particular company tried to drive a solution and then obviously the market reacted that it's not objective anymore. But how the other, you can call it an explosion of online platforms. Have they helped also Freightos, and have they helped decision process? How do you see all this? Literally, last couple of years, we've seen a lot of them popping up.
Yes, let's say a few have popped up.
Yes, maybe explosion is too much.
A slight overstatement. Still 9 freight is sold offline.
Yes.
Out of 100,000 freight forwarders in the world, maybe there's 10 who've got their rates online. But you're right. That's a big change from where we were 2 years ago when it was virtually zero. This helps us. We're not trying to bring the whole industry just onto Freightos. We want to digitize the industry, and we're delighted that some of the carriers, at least a couple of the carriers, and Hapag-Lloyd and CMA CGM and Maersk and a couple of airlines and a handful of freight forwarders are also selling online, and this helps us to change the behaviors and to teach people that the same convenience. All the people who are buying freight, all the shippers, at home they use Amazon and Netflix, and they all know these conveniences from their personal life, and I think these other digital efforts are helping to educate the industry that at last, freight can be bought in the same way that other things can, online in a very convenient digital way.
Yes. And what would you say, Zvi, what would you say that is your main target customer and the most, because I think you work with, obviously you work with forwarders, you work with shippers, you work with e-commerce, you have a palette of different products. Mm-hmm. What would you say your main kind of targets and the best case studies for success so far?
Well, so marketplace. So there's two sides by nature. There's the service providers and there's the customers who we call shippers in this industry, the people who are buying, importers and exporters, basically. So we started by working with the with the freight forwarders, and that's gone very well. I mean, we work now with over 1,000 freight forwarders. Out of the top 20, global freight forwarders, at least 15 are customers of ours. Particularly strong, we acquired a company called Web Cargo along the way, which makes us particularly strong in air cargo, but also in ocean. So, that's really got quite some scale now. I mean, freight forwarders are searching for rates on the Freightos platform, the professional freight forwarding platform, about 1 million times every month.
Wow.
So that's really got quite some scale now. The newer part and the more exciting part maybe of Freightos as well is the website where shippers, importers and exporters can actually come and look for freight services, air and ocean. That's been live for 2 years, just over 2 years now. And I have to say that so far it attracted mostly small importers and exporters, particularly strong in the US, which was our initial focus. Now, as it gets more mature and grows, we're starting to see some bigger shippers using it as well for their spot quotes, not for their regular annual tenders, but we are seeing bigger shippers using it when they have a sort of a transactional business, a spot quote. We're particularly strong, of course, as you might guess, with e-commerce vendors. I mean, there's even in the past, about 1/3 of import and export was handled by small businesses. And now I think that's growing even more because there's so many e-commerce players popping up. So people forget that sometimes there's a lot of attention given to the Walmarts and the big shippers. But actually, over 30% of the import and export is handled by small businesses. And 30% is a huge amount to take into account. The biggest freight forwarder has maybe 7 or 8%. So when you're able to aggregate these small importers and exporters, that's a huge part of the industry and a growing part of the industry.
Correct. And especially when you give them an easy to access tool that they can use themselves. I mean, all of a sudden, and it's pretty much once you have the platform, they can just use it. I mean, it's not like you need to deal with individuals per se. So it's a great way to address that market.
Particularly when many of them are e-commerce players, so their whole business is online, and that's how they expect
fast moving.
Yeah, fast moving. Correct. Yeah.
Correct. And how do you, we got this question from one of our, I think you kind of addressed it, but I want to go a little bit deeper, is how do you ensure that the liners and the different freight forwarders hosted on the platform are not just competing on price point, but also giving the desired level of service? So is there like a rating system as well, or how do you ensure that type of, it's not just price, it's also service?
Yeah, that's a key question. So yes, absolutely. There's rating like you'd expect on the internet. You can see how many stars other shippers have given this service provider. You can read the comments, and it's all comments from actual customers. Nobody can post. Only somebody who's actually placed a shipment with that forwarder or with that carrier can post a review. So you see real reviews. We have now some of the service providers on Freightos have already done over 1,000 shipments and a couple of $1 million worth of shipments on our platform. So some of them now have a large number of reviews. Some of them are a bit newer. So absolutely, the reputation and the reviews are very important. The transit time is very important. And in some cases, the service provider has extra features that they offer. For example, we have a major ocean carrier who's selling on Freightos, and they are able to guarantee a slot on a specific shipment. So when you book with forwarders, they typically say, we'll try and get it on a ship within a week, but it's kind of a vague commitment. But we do have one carrier who offer a distinguished service where they say, if you click here, you have a guaranteed slot on Wednesday morning sailing. And so whenever one of the service providers has some extra feature, which we think is interesting to the importers and exporters, then we're happy to highlight that. So, our aim is not just to be transparent about price, but also about service and reputation and any value add that they might offer.
Super. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the last round of funding which you got from the Singapore Exchange, which is a very interesting interest in get on board, and I think it was about 44 million. And they were saying that together with you guys at Freightos, they will explore the development of financial instruments to introduce the transparency, agility, and risk mitigation that other industries already enjoy. And also because they are, I think the SGX is linked to the with the Baltic exchange. So I just wanted to ask you, how do you plan to? Because it's all about synchronicities, right? And also when you get an investor, it's more about just the monetary investment, but it's also about the partnerships. So how do you plan to develop this synchronicities between SGX and Freightos moving forward?
The synergy with SGX is already starting to develop very nicely. Even before the investment, we launched an index, which is the most reliable index for ocean container prices. And it's now called FBX, the Freightos Baltic Index. Baltic is a subsidiary of SGX, which has been doing data about shipping for more than 200 years, actually, in London. So it's a very famous and institution in the maritime industry. So the roadmap with SGX looks like we've got FBX, which is an index. It competes kind of with the Shanghai index, but it's much broader. It's based on much more data, and it's not only for China. It covers many major trade lanes around the world, not just China. So we have the index SGX. We're moving now to actually move that from a weekly index to a daily index, and to make sure it has, together with our partners, to make sure that this has the regulatory approval to be a benchmark for financial instruments. Because now, ever since the Libor scandal, if you remember that, there's new regulation to say you can't just make any index and then trade derivatives. You have to have some regulation to make sure that your index is reliable and independent. So we're going through that process to make the FBX index of container shipping, to make it daily, to make it audited. And then based on that, we're going to be launching together with SGX derivatives, where you can actually, if you're a carrier and you want to protect yourself against prices dropping, or if you're a shipper and you want to protect yourself against prices increasing, both of those things will be possible using standard financial instruments, which are already common in other industries.
Super. That's exciting. That's very exciting. Yeah. I'll watch out for that. I think it's an excellent initiative. Another question that is quite deep, but I think it's also the audience is there's different standards, right? I mean, in terms of the industry and in terms of the different continents, or let's say Europe and Asia, there's different challenges in terms of how do you kind of define standards, operations, procedures, and all of that. Have you hit certain big differences in between operating in different parts of the world as opposed to other parts of the world, or how has it been for you guys?
That's an interesting question. I mean, in theory, the industry is structured fairly similarly in most parts. China has some sort of interesting nuances of its own. Overall, I mean, we do have customers, all around the world, but overall, we've actually been strongest in Europe. And second strongest in North America, and then third strongest in Asia. But I think that just reflects the way the industry is structured, where if you look at the top 10 freight forwarders, 3PLs in the world, at least 6 of them are European.
Yes.
And almost all of them based in Germany and Switzerland, actually. So that's just, somehow they're very good at logistics over there.
Yeah.
So that's a very right. Yeah, that's right. They all seem to have chosen the same canton of Switzerland, which has the lowest tax. That's also an
and it doesn't really have a lot of water around it, but yeah.
Well, that's right. Yeah, that's kind of the irony, right? That's kind of the irony. The world's biggest, NVOCC is like Kuhn & Nagel sitting in Switzerland of all places. But anyway. So that's a particularly strong area. Europe, we all do really in Barcelona, called Freightos Web Cargo now. But we have plenty of customers in North America and in Asia. So it's by its very nature, this is a global business. You can't be just in one place. And some of our European customers, customers like Panalpina and Hellman although we work with them, their headquarters are in Europe, they roll out our software across 50, 60 countries around the world. So it's used everywhere.
Yeah. So that's good because it also provides that standardization. And how do you, I mean, you've grown tremendously, you're growing tremendously. I'm curious, where do you plan to expand next? And maybe talk to us a little bit, or talk to the audience a little bit about also if there's certain focus area. You started acquiring different companies. You spoke about different products. I think there was an aspect about Express as well, potentially being on the platform. So, geographically as well as in terms of clients, where do you plan to expand more and next?
Okay, so in terms of product, our focus is international air and ocean. We do have already some Express on the platform. We do have some LTL, but I don't consider Express or LTL to be strategic products because there are other perfectly good platforms to LTL and Express are simpler products, and there are other good websites where you can find that. So we have it as well for completeness, but I don't feel that we bring some unique value there. For international air and ocean, Freightos is really by far the best site, almost the only site where you can receive many instant price quotes. So our strategic focus is air and ocean. In terms of started in the US, and we started with small shippers, a lot of e-commerce, and we're basically expanding in two directions. One is we do move up market as the coverage, the offering becomes richer and cheaper and better, then we do start to attract bigger importers and exporters sometimes. And we've started to expand geographically. So we've launched in Canada and UK, and the next launch will be in Germany for the shippers. And then after that, more countries in Europe and in Asia over the next couple of years. So yeah, as I say, gradually expanding up market and expanding geographically.
Super.
Another key area is that it's now become, I just was going to add one more thing, which is that we're also seeing some carriers now taking an interest. I think you mentioned in selling digitally, and that's an important development in the industry. And certainly we have already one major carrier on our platform.
Yeah, I think, who was it? Maersk announced in the last couple of weeks that they finally managed to have what the airline industry has for a long, long time. They finally managed to get it for the shipping industry, which is that time for platform. So definitely they're trying to move in the right direction, and hopefully then there's going to be some even bigger synchronicities for you guys with them as well. And moving a little bit to the softer side of things, and you've had a lot of building companies is with this, right? So I wanted to ask you also in the direction of what we do a lot, which is recruitment, which is talent acquisition, and which is attracting talent. When it comes to hiring people, right, and when it comes to attracting the right type of people at Freightos, what do you focus on when it comes down to that?
Yeah, goodness, in the end, it's all about people, right? So we're looking for people who are intelligent and driven and team players and hardworking, collaborative. And then, unfortunately, nobody's perfect. Nobody has everything that you need. And then
that's fortunately, right?
I guess, right. Overall, we've got a fantastic team. It's really a pleasure to work with them. At this time of the year, every winter I go, because we're now 200 people. So it's hard to have a relationship with all of them at this point. But every winter I start having lunches with a team, about 5 or 6 at a time. So it can end up now being sort of 30 lunches or so. But I make sure I sort of meet every part of the team at least once a year in case I'm not otherwise interacting with them. Overall it's a great team. We people are really bought into the vision. They really feel that there's a significant opportunity here to make shipping better, and as a result, make world trade better, to make it easier for people to import and export, and that has an amazing effect on creating jobs and creating wealth and creating consumer choice. So, in the end, we really feel privileged that we're at the forefront of digitizing such an important industry to the world.
Yes. And what would you say, because obviously as the CEO of the company, you're the main driver for culture. So again, a soft element, but a tremendously important element to make or break pretty much a company. And you've done it many times before, and usually, not all the time actually, strong companies and strong startups have a strong culture. Would you say, if I ask you, what are some of the elements that define Freightos culture?
Well, I try to, I work hard, and I try to be very transparent and honest. And that's, I say try, but that's sort of naturally how I feel most comfortable. I don't enjoy keeping secrets or So I just try to be very, very open and honest about almost everything, except some very sensitive things which you have to keep quiet. But I sit in the open space. I don't have an office. I connected on Slack to everyone, so everyone in the company is free to chat to me. And I try listen. I'm not always 100% good at that, but I'm certainly try very hard to be open to criticism and feedback. That's it. Nothing very very unique, but it works for me.
Yes. And typically it boils down to the fundamentals. It doesn't, it's hardly ever something, totally out of this world. It's just that typically we as humans, we forget to do the fundamentals. So it's funny how it typically revolves around, listening to people, being available to people and being present to people, right? So it's, so they have that level of access to you. And what I wanted to ask is, because it's also about more and more, it's also about, and you talked about vision and you talked about, giving people a purpose, right? And giving the team and giving the employees a purpose. What would be some of the challenges when it comes to, because you're fighting in a way. There's a lot of these out there, right? Your IBMs and your big technology companies and whatnot, they're all kind of fighting, you're fighting with them for the same talent sometimes. How do you manage to attract that talent to Freightos as opposed to, letting them go to competition? Or what would be some of the unique benefits that somebody would have to join Freightos?
People, but I must say, when we fight for talent, it's rarely with sort of IBM.
Correct.
Occasionally it is. Occasionally that's for our talent in Israel, nearby. In fact, it's based on my startup, which IBM acquired 10 years ago. The IBM office in Jerusalem. And of course,
you should have signed a contract with those guys. I'm telling you the startup, but don't take any more people.
Right, but it's more than 10 years now, so anything like that would have expired. But anyway, so there is, of course, we do have IBM and Microsoft and Google and Amazon and Facebook are all big employers in Israel, as they are in other places. But I think most of the competition comes from startups. At least in the culture in Israel, most engineers have found that it can be more fun to work in a startup and you can get more satisfaction. Nothing wrong, of course, with those big companies, but somehow when you're in a company with tens of thousands of engineers, you may not get as much satisfaction as when you work in a startup and you're a significant part of the team and you feel more directly how you're impacting the success. So look, there's always competition for the talent. Now our best to treat our team well and give them interesting challenges and have success together. So that's a constant pressure. But overall, we've had a good team and most of them have been loyal. And in the few cases where people have left, it has not normally been for a big company.
Got it. And looking back at your journey as an entrepreneur, because we have a lot of people in the audience that want to become or want to be entrepreneurs, or, maybe they've been with a corporate for a long time and now they want to at some point make the plunge. And can you share one or two lessons that you've learned so far in your journeys and in your years as well for them?
Goodness. I think key is to enjoy the journey, right? Because in the end, most startups fail. And you can't control everything in life, right? So you can do the right things. You can have a great idea and build a great team and work smart, do all of those things. But there's always an element of luck. And you can see in every success and every failure that luck played a role. So the key thing is also to enjoy the journey and have fun and not take it too seriously. I've found, I'm fortunate to have had mostly successes, but I've had failures as well. And I find if you're honest with people along the way, for example, when people invest, you're honest about the risks, then you can still, you don't have to feel bad when it fails because you went into it together, you knew the risks. If it succeeds, everyone's happy. But I'm still on very good terms with investors who lost money on one of my startups. And there were really no hard feelings. We all knew the risks. We gave it our best shot. And on that particular occasion, it didn't work out, and that's okay as well.
Yes, yes. And final, kind of drawing to the conclusion and final question from me. I'm talking specifically about Freightos and looking back at the Freightos story so far, which has been, already seven years, right? So coming to 7 years. Yep. What are some of the things that make you most proud of it?
Look, I mean, I think what's exciting with Freightos, many other startups, is a really big, complicated problem. A lot of startups take on a much narrower problem, and there's nothing wrong with that. And you take on international freight, you're dealing with different current modes and different business rules and different a big mess of data. I mean, believe it or not, we've had to read into our database about 100,000 massive Excel sheets with no standards and a lot of mess. Really big problem, getting all of this data for every ocean liner and every airline and every major trucking company all around the world, and rail and river barges sometimes. Getting all of that data and all of those local business rules, getting all of that into one big global database is a hell of a challenge. So I think what's exciting in Freightos, we really didn't shy away from taking on a very large, complex challenge, and that we're having some good initial success in digitizing all of that.
No, indeed. I mean, it's almost, I mean, if I may use an extreme term, it's insane that you even embarked on this journey. But I guess there's always that's where you can find diamonds, right? In pretty messy environment sometimes. So
that's right.
It seems like you've come a long way, definitely. And I know I said it's my last question, but I need to come back to where we started, and I just have this personal curiosity because you also wrote a book, right? That Fizz Nothing is as it seems. You need to tell me a little bit about it. So it's the history of physics as a novel, right? So what? Oh yeah. Tell me a little bit about the book. I mean, I'm just curious.
Oh yeah, thanks. So Fizz, it's written F-I-Z-Z, but of course it's a play on words of physics. But Fizz is a character. It was the model by a book called Sophie's World, which told the history of philosophy as a story. But it's the same sort of concept. So this is a story about a teenage girl called Fizz, and she time travels and goes back and meets Aristotle and Galileo and Newton and Einstein, and tries to understand the universe by having informal chats with these people, and then eventually comes back to the present and understands her own time travel and how that was possible or wasn't possible. So it's just, I love physics, and I just found it. But in university, I'd learned a lot of physics, but very little of the history. So sort of fun, not too serious book was my way of learning for myself, how physics developed and how we got from Aristotle's very bizarre understanding of the world all the way to modern physics.
Yes. Fantastic. Very, very interesting. So thank you for sharing. Thank you also, Zvi, thank you for all the sharings, for all the good stories and the takeaways and that you have shared with us today. And I really wish you and I think from everybody from our community as well, lots of successes and to grow Freightos to new heights.
Thank you so much. It's been great to be on, Radu. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to follow us on radupalamario.com/podcast for all the show notes, links, and extra tips covered in the interview. Make sure also to email the news in the nick of time. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes or Stitcher and you like what we do, please kindly review and give us 5 stars so we can keep the energy flowing and get more people to find out about our podcast. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me to stay tuned for our latest articles as well as future guests for the podcast. And if you have any suggestions or any other idea, please feel free to write to me. I respond to all. And also, please make sure not to miss our next episode, where we will be having a few other C-level and top leaders in supply chain joining us. Stay tuned.